Did you know that St. Luke's University Health Network, based in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, has been recognized by the U.S. government as the highest performing health system in the United States for quality? You heard right. St. Luke's #1 recognition affirms our status as the top leader among the most respected healthcare providers in the nation, including Houston Methodist and the Mayo Clinic. To state it simply, if you want to receive the best care when you go to a hospital, come to St. Luke's.
Taxi! Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
You are now re-entering the Stone Zone. Well, according to explosive testimony yesterday before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, the CIA was accused of taking back 40 boxes of documents pertaining to the Kennedy assassination and the controversial MK-Ultra mind control program from the offices of the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, documents reportedly being prepared for declassification and public release. A CIA whistleblower, one James Erdman III, has claimed the agency not only seized the files, but also monitored the computers and phones of Gabbard's investigators as they examined an alleged cover-up surrounding the origins of COVID-19. Now, let's be abundantly clear. Tulsi Gabbard has been doing exactly what the American people deserve, pushing sunlight, accountability, and truth in a government too often addicted to secrecy. It was, after all, Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence, who declassified all the documents that proved once and for all that the claims of Russian collusion in the election of Donald Trump in 2016 were entirely a hoax. She followed that up by declassifying documents that proved without any doubt whatsoever that the two impeachments were also based totally on fabricated evidence. So all of those attacking Tulsi Gabbard now should be looked on with suspicion, as the deep state really fears her. She's been incredibly brave and effective in her role with the DNI, and all those who are trying to subvert her, such as the reality-detached ghoul, Laura Loomer, well, I think they should be ashamed of themselves. Former CIA officer Robert Carrico told Fox News that the agency has no authority to overrule either the president or the Director of National Intelligence. He said the files were mandated for declassification and that Americans have the right to know what is inside. Congresswoman Anna Paulina Lunar said the CIA has 24 hours to return the records or face a congressional subpoena. She called the seizure deeply troubling, especially because President Trump had ordered full declassification of all of the records pertaining to the Kennedy assassination. The CIA, in turn, denies bad faith and calls the hearing political theater. But that is what CIA spooks always do. They lie and deny. It's what they're best at. After decades of secrecy, destroyed records, discredited denials around the controversial MK-Ultra mind control program, by the way, CIA Director Richard Helms destroyed most of those documents on the very day that the existence of the program leaked to the Washington Post and was published on page 1. That was back in 1974. But they've also lied about the Kennedy assassination and virtually everything else under the sun. Americans deserve the right to know. We can no longer be allowed to hide under the cloak of national security. It's time for the CIA to face public scrutiny. Has been skirting since its very inception. People don't know this, but on the day after Kennedy's assassination, President Harry Truman wrote an op-ed piece for the Washington Post in which he said that signing the CIA into law was the greatest single mistake that he had ever made, and went on to say that they had violated their charter, which determined that they were only to operate abroad and they were not to operate in the United States. That op-ed by a former president of the United States only ran for one edition before it was spiked by the Washington Post, leading to my longtime suspicion that the Washington Post is also controlled by the Central Intelligence Agency. Glad to see that my good friend Rudy Giuliani is back on the air after having made a miraculous recovery following a life-threatening health scare. America's mayor says the experience was a deeply spiritual one for him. The 81-year-old former New York City mayor, perhaps the greatest mayor in New York history, revealed Wednesday that he had battled a serious case of pneumonia. that sent him to the hospital, according to friends, and very briefly put him into a coma. During his first broadcast of America's Mayor Live, which is what he calls his show, since being hospitalized, Giuliani said that he had what was called a very significant spiritual experience. He described feeling as though he was headed towards a trial before St. Peter, when his late lifelong friend and former top aide, Peter Powers, appeared in a dreamlike intervention. Giuliani said Powers spoke meaningful words to him and that he recorded the memory shortly after he woke up. He also woke up with a priest at the hospital because they did administer last rites to New York's greatest mayor. Powers, a good man who died in 2016, was Giuliani's high school friend, campaign manager, and his first deputy mayor. Giuliani was hospitalized in critical condition on May 3rd with viral pneumonia, apparently worsened by the respiratory problems dating back to the aftermath of the September 11th terror attacks. Now, Giuliani says he's making a strong recovery and feels like his old self. He's resumed light exercise, walks stairs, and says he feels 100%, even if doctors may not quite agree yet. He also thanked President Trump, calling him a terrific friend and a godsend to this country. Rudy Giuliani's story is one of faith, friendship, resilience, and gratitude, and a fighting spirit of a man who helped lead America through one of its darkest days. Rudy Giuliani still has a lot more good work to do to help this country and the MAGA renaissance that's going on. We need fighters like him on the front lines for our nation. The Lord has answered our prayers, including mine, and Rudy Giuliani will be continuing to fight alongside us as a result. More good news for the American economy. Kevin Warsh has been narrowly confirmed by the Senate as the 17th chairman of the Federal Reserve, replacing the Trump-hating partisan hack Jerome Too Late Powell, who, by the way, is a lawyer and not even an economist. 8 years of Powell were marked by crisis, conflict, and growing frustration over the central bank's mismanagement of the American economy. Warsh, a Trump appointee, was confirmed this past Wednesday by a 54-45 vote, mostly along party lines. Only Democrat Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania crossed over to support him. The vote was one of the most partisan confirmations for a Federal Reserve chair in the history, showing once again how Democrats will stop at nothing to try to sabotage President Trump, even if it means hurting the American people and our economy. Kevin Warsh is widely seen as more aligned with Trump's economic agenda and is expected to bring long overdue reform to an institution that has become bloated, opaque, and much too insulated from democratic oversight. That's democratic with a small d. Warsh has supported shrinking the Fed's massive $6.7 trillion balance sheet, cutting back Washington staffing, policies, meetings, and holding fewer press conferences, ending the Fed's habit of constantly telegraphing interest rate moves, and otherwise ignoring the two criteria for an interest rate cut: unemployment and inflation. Warsh has argued that years of massive bond buying made the Fed too entangled with government spending and the financial markets. His first meeting as chair is scheduled for June 16th and 17th. And incredibly, Powell will remain as a governor for now because he remains doggedly obsessed with helping to undermine President Trump. Only twice in the Federal Reserve's 113-year history has a Federal Reserve Board governor remained on the board after no longer serving as chairman. After Warsh is officially confirmed, it may be time to fire back up the investigations into Powell and his multi-billion-dollar federal renovation of his already palatial headquarters. There is no question whatsoever that Powell lied before the Congress. It's hard to believe that Warsh could do any worse than his predecessor. I think we're going to get the Federal Reserve interest rate cut that America believes. But how the Senate gets away with hearing Chairman Powell say very specifically that his multi-billion-dollar renovation of the already palatial Federal Reserve headquarters does not include a private elevator for the Fed governors. That was a lie. Does not include a private dining room for the Fed governors. That was a lie. And did not include a palatial roof garden reserved only for the Federal Reserve governors. 3 simple lies, all under oath. When the entity, like the Fed, has the ability to print money out of thin air with no limits, they tend to abuse that power, which is why perhaps It's time to end the Federal Reserve forever, as former Texas Congressman Ron Paul has frequently urged. We should perhaps just repeal the Federal Reserve Act and do away with this monstrosity. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump says Cuba is asking for help and the United States is willing to talk. In a Truth Social post on Tuesday, Trump called Cuba a failed country headed down, adding that Havana is seeking assistance and that talks will happen. But so far, the Cubans have refused a $100 million offer of assistance unless that assistance was handed over to the Cuban government rather than a third party such as the Catholic Church. The president has made Cuba a major focus of his second term, increasing pressure on the communist regime through sanctions, an oil blockade, and repeated warnings from his administration. Trump said that Cuba is not doing well. That would be an understatement, and said the issue would be addressed at the right time. See, when the president essentially ended the flow of oil from Venezuela to Cuba, Cuba lost its access to cheap oil. A White House official went further, saying within a short period of time, Cuba's regime could fall, and then America would be there to help. President Trump has imposed multiple sanctions aimed at choking off the communist leadership and enforcing real concessions. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose family roots, of course, trace to Cuba, announced additional penalties back on May 7th. Earlier, President Trump broadened sanctions against regime officials, affiliates, and anyone tied to corruption or human rights abuses. There's also talk of indicting Raul Castro, now 94, the brother of Fidel Castro, and his successor in the violent shoot-down of the Brothers to the Rescue mission over Cuba some years ago. The administration has also targeted countries providing oil to Cuba, worsening pressure on Havana's already fragile energy system. Blackouts are widespread. There's fuel rationing, and shortages have become part of daily life for Cubans trapped under the decades of socialist failure. Cuban Americans, including Fidel Castro's daughter, have urged Trump to turn his attention onto the island. President Trump has described the possibility of fleeing or even taking Cuba as an honor. With the removal of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela happening so quickly, and the new regime in Venezuela working closely with the U.S., President Trump is emboldened to embark on similar measures, I think, now to liberate Cuba, and the time is now. Communism has failed. Cuba is collapsing. If America can help open the door to freedom without expending blood and treasure, we absolutely should do so. Meanwhile, House Democrats are teaming up with a handful of turncoat Republicans to force another Ukraine funding vote, defying Speaker Mike Johnson and the America First wing of the Republican Party. All 215 House Democrats signed a discharge petition to bypass the House leadership and bring Ukrainian support to the floor. They were joined by Republicans Brian Fitzpatrick and Don Bacon. Those are what we call rhinos, Republicans in name only, along with California independent Kevin Kiley and the anti-Trump taters of the caucus, giving the petition the 218 signatures needed to proceed. The bill would send another $1.3 billion in military aid and assistance to Ukraine, with the possibility of up to $8 billion more in direct loans. Loan that critics warn will become loans in names only, as the money goes straight up Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's nose. The legislation also reaffirms U.S. support for Ukraine and NATO, backs reconstruction efforts, and expands sanctions and export controls against Russia's financial, oil, mining, and political sectors. The American people are tired of this war, and they're tired to pay for it, but Democrat Gregory Meeks urged quick passage of this new $1.3 billion present from Uncle Sam, saying Ukraine's fighters are waiting. Meeks is not wrong. Ukraine's soldiers are certainly waiting to die in a war being waged for globalists that has zero chance of victory. Many Americans are fed up as arms in Washington, D.C. swamp find more money to wage foreign wars, while America faces a projected $1.9 trillion deficit, an immigration crisis, struggling families, and crumbling infrastructure here at home. Ukraine and Russia have resumed fighting after a short ceasefire, as Russia continues to make gains in Eastern Europe's Donbass region. Yet instead of putting an end to this madness, the D.C. War Caucus wants to write them another huge check. Sadly, the bill will likely pass the House, but it faces a tougher path in the U.S. Senate. That's where Republicans have to put their foot down. This war is only being waged as a proxy because butthurt globalists hate Russia so much. Millions have died needlessly as a result. If we turn off the spigot of aid, then the fighting can stop and Zelensky can face justice in the streets as he deserves. He's put off elections because he knows he would lose. It is time to end this conflict. Thanks for joining the Stone Zone. We'll be right back.